Well, a very good evening to you all. It is a real honour to be with you this evening. Thank you, Surinder, for that welcome. And I want to start straight away by saying that the irony is not lost on me of being invited to speak this evening. Here I stand as a middle-aged, white, privileged British male being asked to speak to the annual general meeting of the Race Equality Centre. I stand here in all humility, in the knowledge of the work that so many of you are involved in working for race equality in this city and beyond, and I am truly humbled to be invited to say just a few words at the beginning of this evening. If I was asked what in any sense qualifies me to speak this evening, well, first of all, it is simply that I've had the great joy of working with Surinder a little bit over recent months, both during his time as High Sheriff and during this past year since I've been here as Bishop of Leicester. It's been a real privilege to be able to work with him, and indeed to continue to do so. He and I are together hosting, along with Avtar Singh, who's the chair of the Leicestershire Hospitals NHS Trust, a day looking at diversity in senior leadership. Coming up in November, we've invited a group of senior leaders from across the city and the county to come together to look at why it is that there are so few Black, Asian and minority ethnic people in senior leadership in our city and our county. And if you are at all unsure about that, take a look at the website, The Colour of Power, and it has photographs on there of every senior leader in our country, and you will very quickly get a sense of why we want to address something of that. The second reason that perhaps in some sense qualifies me for speaking today is actually to do with Canon Irving Richards, who is here, and who has just been re-elected to the Executive Committee, I think, of TREC. So Canon Irving, as one of the clergy in my diocese, I went to visit him some months back, as part of visiting all the clergy in my diocese. And when I arrived, he simply said to me, "I'd like to take you to see some of my friends." I said, "Okay, that's fine. Who are they?" "Oh, that's a surprise," he said. So I had to get into his car and be driven across Leicester. That's an experience in itself. To arrive then at the offices of TREC and to be introduced to Iris and to others working in the office there, and to be very, very warmly welcomed. That was my first introduction, so thank you to Canon Irving. And then finally, I suppose I do want to say, in terms of wanting to speak this evening, that in the Church of England, we are very, very conscious that we have a lot to do in this area. Surinder was very kind in speaking about others who've gone before me and who were involved in setting up what is now TREC. But I am very conscious that more widely in the church we have a lot to do in the area of race equality, which is why already in my first year I have taken the step of appointing our first diversity officer effectively within the diocese, and also you may know that I will soon be getting a colleague as Bishop of Loughborough, who is from Iran originally, and will bring a very interesting perspective, I think, being a part of a minority group from Iran. So that's just a little part of the background. What I want to do just in the next few minutes, and I'll be very brief, I want to leave space for some questions as well, to say something about the context in which you are working and the work of race equality in particular. I had the great privilege just last week, in fact, of meeting Brendan Cox. Now, Brendan is the widower of Joe Cox, MP, who was tragically and brutally murdered last year. Brendan and Joe together began a work looking at our communities and looking at how we bring together people of different backgrounds in our communities. And talking with Brendan was a huge privilege, because Joe's death has, I think, in a sense, only made him want to work even harder for that cause. But as we spoke together, I was struck by a particular phrase that he used, which was that within our society today, we are experiencing something of a perfect storm of insecurity. Let me just say why I think that is. And it's connected, of course, to the whole rise of what's referred to as populism within Europe and the United States in particular, but more widely in the world, I believe, as well. And within that populism, of course, there is always the hint, if not more, of racism. So first and foremost, something about the physical insecurity. So we live in an age where it appears hardly a month goes by without a terrorist attack of some sort or another. We live then in an age of fear, an age when many wonder what the future holds for our society and the world. Here in Leicester, we've been very privileged to be able to hold together good relationships between the different parts of our community, the different faith communities in particular that I'm involved in. It's been good that in the wake of attacks in Manchester, in Westminster and so on, we've been able to hold joint vigils. I attended one at one of our local mosques and was invited to speak on that occasion. Standing together in those circumstances is hugely important. And I'm very aware as a religious leader within the city that I, together with other religious leaders, carry particular responsibility for seeking to address the levels of fear that do exist within our society. The second one, though, would be to do with economic insecurity. So after a century or so, when living standards have roughly doubled for every generation, we've now reached a point where they have plateaued. And so latest statistics show that something like 24% of people think that their children will be better off than they are. So when I talk to young people as well, there is a general sense of uncertainty about the future, a general wondering of what will the future hold for me, particularly when it comes to work and to the economy. Technology, for all its wonders, has nevertheless brought insecurity around jobs. So physical insecurity, economic insecurity, but then something also around cultural insecurity. Not just to do with the issue of immigration, but also to do with liberalising social attitudes, a sense of complexity within our society, that we just don't quite know how society works anymore. How do we bring about change? How do we transform things for the better? There is a general sense, I put it to you, of people thinking, I can't make a difference any longer. There is a real sense of cultural insecurity linked to identity. Who are we as a nation? Who are we as a community now? And then fourthly, trust in our institutions. So I'm very aware, obviously, as a leader within the Church of England, that there was a day when the Church of England was looked to be one of those places that cushions people from anxiety, a place that brings people together to offer some sort of bulwark against the changes going on in society. And yet, increasingly, as social attitude surveys show, people are no longer turning to religious institutions, but then neither are they turning to other bodies. Huge suspicion of government, huge suspicion of different organisations. Yes, our trust in institutions is breaking down too. And then finally, and I'm sorry, I know this is a bleak picture in one sense, but then something to do with the collapse of our community spirits. That for many people living in society today, we don't know our neighbours. We may live alongside people, but we get in and out of our cars and drive to different places of work, different places of socialising. We spend our time in front of screens of one sort or another. We certainly don't let our kids play out on the street anymore. And so there is a sense that, again, we are living with deep insecurity. Well, I apologise, I say, if that's something of a bleak picture, but as I say, in conversation with Brendan Cox, it was that thought of a perfect storm of insecurity. But it leaves us with the question, well, what then do we do? Do we simply throw up our hands and say, we can't do anything, and give in? Well, far from it. I want to suggest two challenges challenges that I believe face us today, in which provide the context for the work of TREC. The first is about how do we get people to engage with the other, whoever the other might be, but the person who is different in some way, the person who has the different cultural background, the different educational background, whatever it may be. How do we enable people to step out of their comfort zone and meet with others? Brendan Cox organised the great get-together earlier on this year in memory of his wife Jo, but an attempt to try and find a new way of bringing communities together, to encourage people to come out on the streets and meet with one another, get to know one another. He reckons that somewhere around 9.2 million people across the country responded to that, more even than for the Queen's Jubilee. I think that's an excellent example of finding new ways of encouraging people to mix and to break down something of the barriers within society. For me, it fits very powerfully with my own Christian faith, which is based on that central command to love God and to love neighbour. But within that idea of neighbour, of course, when Jesus was asked, "Who is my neighbour?" he gave a story which talked about somebody who was very, very different. The person indeed that I may naturally think of as my enemy, the one I am afraid of. And his command was to go towards that person and to see them as my neighbour and learn to love them. But then alongside finding ways to engage with the other, I think there is also something about developing a narrative, a story of togetherness alongside the story of diversity. It's quite right that we should celebrate the diversity of this great city in particular. We have a lot to be proud of in the way our different communities do work together in all sorts of ways. But we've more to do, I want to suggest, in developing that story of what unites us and what brings us together. We are sometimes very good at talking about diversity, talking about the importance of multiculturalism and so on. But how do we counter the narrative of extremist groups, counter the narrative of those who have taken the national identity and used it for wrong causes? Well, one of the ways that maybe we do this is through, as I say, creating different new institutions which can reinvigorate community life. Again, one of the things we're doing in just a few months is drawing together people to look at the possibility of setting up something called Citizens UK within Leicester. I'm involved in that again, just beginning to explore what it would look like to bring together people of different backgrounds around common issues, so identifying particular needs within our communities and saying, how can we now work together, and in the process of working together, get to know one another better and build the trust and security that we all need. So that's just something about the context in which we work and a couple of suggestions about the challenges that we face. I offer them, as I say, in all humility, not as the answer, but rather as something that I am committed to. It is my belief that the Church of England is here for the whole nation, and we intend to work for the whole nation. Thank you very much for your patience in listening to me this evening. I think, well, I'm going to ask Surinder if we have time for questions.